Welcome, Vicky. So uh, Vicky has joined us today. Thank you for 100 Days and Beyond podcast, where we speak to all what I believe are the unsung heroes of the merger, post-merger integration or post-acquisition integration world, the people that really get stuff done. When we look at M&A work or mergers and acquisitions, as people call it, it's the acquisitions of businesses where you go through searching targets, doing your negotiations, your due diligence, and then putting a deal together, getting the deal signed, and then the plans or the strategic reason for purchasing a business or for acquiring an entity often then needs to be implemented. And when it needs to be implemented, then we have specialists. And my belief is that often that's where 80% of the work sits. You know, doing the deal, yes, it's all complicated and all that. But when you're doing integration work, that's essentially where all the real rough and tumble and where the nuances sit and so on. Today we've got Vicky Tallon. I'm going to read your profile quickly, Vicky, and then I'm going to introduce you. Then you're welcome to say hello. Vicky is a merger, acquisition, and carve-out specialist, which is something I really want to tackle today as well, for operational integration and separation. Confident, versatile, and resourceful, which you need to be in this space, and with excellent stakeholder engagement, again, very, very important, and a reputation for deal speed for successful results. And I think that sums it up in a large way. I mean, there are additional things that come up on your LinkedIn profile, and I invite the audience to have a look. But Vicky, welcome to our show.
Thank you very much, Dudley. I'm delighted to join you today.
Yeah, we're really looking forward to today's episode, and maybe just as a start, tell us how you got here. How did you get into this, and how did you get introduced into this wonderful but sometimes hardworking world?
So I was introduced to this world through KPMG. At the time I was working for KPMG Consulting. And I joined the M&A team, headed up then by a gentleman called John Kelly, who I think I could say was a mentor of mine, along with another colleague of his called Steve Muntz, who was also a big mentor. And I worked with them at KPMG Consulting, and that's how I started my M&A career. I'm sure we're going to talk about it a bit later, but then I dived off into more operational experience, and then I've come back into the M&A specific market later in my life, where I'm sitting now, and I'm back in it, and I know that I love it. I think that's one of the things that I've learned, is that on my journey I've done lots of things, lots of really interesting things, but this is the thing that I really love to do.
Yeah, and I think often it's the passion, it's the love for what you do that gets you up in the morning, but also gets you delivering your best work, and also finding that fulfillment. Because I think often people that end up in the wrong place or the wrong careers and that sort of thing, they might be good at it, but they never really get great at that particular skill or career. And I think you probably found that space. If I after having a bit of a conversation with you the first time, maybe tell us a bit about that in terms of purpose and finding that direction. How did you do it? I mean, how did you know this was for you as opposed to everything else you could have done?
So I think what happened for me was that after leaving KPMG, I then went off to another Big Four consulting firm, Ernst & Young, and I worked in a completely separate field, which many of my colleagues at the time, ex-KPMG colleagues, thought was very left field. And I moved into global compliance, which essentially sat within the tax division of Ernst & Young, and I was doing outsourced global compliance. It was very different in many different ways, but there were transferable skills. It was about project management. It was about taking a client who was already had an in-house function to an external function. It also taught me a lot about commercials and legal negotiations, commercial agreements, SLAs, KPIs, all of those kinds of things. And it was a great grounding for me. And I really enjoyed that, but I reached a point at which either I took myself down a tax career, I moved on. And I moved on. In fact, I was wooed away by a niche consulting firm. But unfortunately, at the time, it was the middle of the financial crash in the UK. And so then my path took another turn, and I speak Spanish, having lived in Guatemala for a couple of years, having worked in and lived in Guatemala. And so then I moved to the Foreign Office, where I headed up the back office function for their operations in Spain, and ultimately led to the setting up of a shared service centre in Spain and Portugal, which we then moved to Portugal. So again, many transferable skills: project management, integration, as well as outsourcing, and all the and always the operational side of the business. I also, in my time at the Foreign Office, was head of estate management as well, which included some very fascinating things, including 10 graveyards and the heritage collection of art, which was kept by the ambassadorial residence and the embassy.
Yeah, I think for me, when especially if I look back at all the guests that we've had, and some of the guests that I'll be expecting to have on the show, the hallmark, I think, is a multi-dimensional career as you get exposed to so many different fields. I mean, part of it's when you said, doing government type of work, all the way into commercial and other types of environments, which clearly, if I go back to your actual profile, where you talk about stakeholder engagement, I mean, there's nothing more challenging than going into a government or a non-profit where people are not necessarily driven for careers or that sort of thing, where they have different intent, unless they're excessively ambitious like some certain politicians. But if you look at the general people that do the work in the background, that's difficult stuff to get your head around. And then when you go into the commercial environment, then you've got a slightly different view of the world, different dynamic, different market conditions. Now you've got different types of stakeholders too, because government is different, because you've got the stakeholders are potentially are the government wanting to roll out a new legislation or a plan, or you have your job descriptions and KPIs, etc. When you go into a corporate environment, very well, KPIs and all that kind of thing kick in, and then it depends on the M&A side of things as well, which you'll get to now, and when we go through the discussion. When you're looking at private equity doing an acquisition, as opposed to a corporate or a first-time acquirer, someone doing the first acquisition, as opposed to someone being a serial acquirer, those are all different mindsets. So tell us just a little bit about the stakeholder engagement and I would say the differences, those nuances, because you're still dealing with people. But tell us a little bit about those nuances around those different environments.
So I think for me, the thing about stakeholder engagement is it's about people. It's really all about people. And yes, the environment can make a bit of difference, i.e. whether you're in government or whether you're in commercial, but it's about the individuals and what drives them and what motivates them. And I've worked with people who are highly motivated, visionary, entrepreneurial, very leading. I've also worked with people who are very driven by sheer commercial, and they're just really about the money and about the profit line. And then I've worked with people who they just come in, they do their job, and they want to turn up. And I think the thing about making these kind of deals work, and going back to the sort of integration and separation, it's about working out what it is and what it means for the people that you're working with. In the role that I have, I'm really reliant on teams supporting me in the delivery of that ultimate objective of delivering that, either separation or integration. And for that, I need their buy-in, and I need their help, and I need their support on a very operational level, and as well at senior stakeholder. So I think for me, the stakeholder management is one of the biggest things that make these deals a success. I always come down to it. We can talk about processes. Everybody's got a process now. And many people sell, I've got the best process. And people say, oh, I've done it loads of times. What really, for me, it all boils down to is people. And it comes down to, do you have the right team? to deliver the right results. So it's the right people in the right place at the right time. And I think, going back to your point, what my career has given me, eclectic it may be for many, is it has just exposed me to so many different things that I think one of the things that I write, as you know, is that I'm not faced by challenges or hurdles. I've seen quite a lot of stuff, and I've seen so many different sort of behaviors and reactions and responses, and I just think, okay, all right, and you can't be reactive in that sense. You've got to be intuitive. You've just got to go with what you've got in front of you and the people that you're working with. I hope that helps you.
No, I mean, it's a fantastic, it's a fantastic answer, because I think then what for me, where it leads to is you've got a reputation for deal speed on the one hand, but building relationships take a little bit of time on the other. I mean, do you find that deal speed and relationships are in conflict?
No, I wouldn't say so. So I think building relationships, yes, of course, building really solid long-term relationships, of course, take time. And I would hope that I've built lots of good relationships over time. But when you're working at deals, you've got to build trust very quickly. So you may not be building the longest relationship straight away, but you have to build trust with your stakeholders very quickly and assure them that you've got their back and you're going to do right by them, but in order that they do right by you, so that they deliver for you and you're going to help them and support them. You're not going to leave them adrift. You're not going to leave them feeling exposed. And I think you have to build that trust very quickly. But the other side of the deal speed is more about a lot of people take time to think and process change. And of course, all of this is ultimately about change. And I thought that COVID was one of the most fascinating experiments of change management that we could all observe very publicly. And we saw people say, I don't want to work from home. I don't want to wear masks. I don't want to do anything. And it was complete resistance at the beginning. And then we kind of got 6 months down the road and nobody wanted to stop. Everyone was like, well, I want to stay at home and I want to keep my mask on. And it was interesting because it took 6 months for people to come round comfortably to that change. Now, you can't wait for 6 months in deals. So you've got to find a way to make that happen and that change happen much quicker and drive people to make decisions probably a lot quicker than they want to, comfortably. So it's about creating that place of trust and that place of comfort to enable the people to also perform at their best, especially the senior stakeholders, to make decisions which might be very difficult, very painful for them, or very uncomfortable. Or in some cases, risky, but adventurous. And you've just got to give them that comfort that they can do that with you behind them.
Yeah, and I think if we have a look at, I think it was there was a book called The Speed of Trust, if you recall, written by the Microsoft guy. So I think that is pretty much, I think it goes hand in hand, because you can't speed up if you don't have trust, but you've got to, but it's almost in a sequence. You've got to build that kind of relationship. What is your opinion about almost a sequence in terms of you got this agenda you need to fulfill, but you need to build a relationship to fulfill the agenda.
So I think you have to create impact at the beginning, and create a positive impact at the beginning with all your stakeholders, to the point that they feel comfortable enough to say, okay, I'm going to go along with you. I'm not sure. I don't know. I'm not going to put my hand up and say, yeah, I'm all in, no questions asked. But I'm going to put my hand up and say, I'm in. And that's what you need to build very, very quickly. So you have to create that impact and that trust, initial trust, very quickly. Then you start to work with somebody, and the other development of trust comes further and further as the more you go down. I mean, I'll give you an example. I was working on a deal, and I was working with an IT director, and I sat in on the workstream calls. And he was a bit like, well, you don't need to, it's all right, I'll cover them off. And I said, yeah, but it's helpful for me to hear all the things that you're talking about within the IT work stream, and to see if there's any interdependencies with anything else that's going on in the program. But the other thing was that he was very surprised when he realized that I actually knew quite a bit about what they were talking about, and I was able to make some valuable input and question and challenges into the meetings. And it was just very funny afterwards. He once said to me, he said, you know quite a bit about that, don't you? And I was going, yeah, I do. I don't know what you know, you're the expert, but I know enough to ask questions, and I know enough also to support him. So when we got also in a very tricky situation in that particular deal, and it really hinged on the separation of the systems, I had his back. You know, I stood up behind him and said, okay, this is what we're going to do. And to the point, it was very uncomfortable for all of us. We found ourselves in a bit of an uncomfortable place. But I said to him, it's all right, I will stand there behind you.
Yeah, and I think that for me is one of the attributes of a I don't know if thoroughbred is the right word, but of a true practitioner. It's got the ability to have had exposure in so many different areas, having some experience in so many different areas, having knowledge and skills in so many different areas, and then to be able to bring that as a holistic approach, but also be able to drill down into the individual component parts.
Yeah.
So when you're busy with that engagement, we're still busy with the stakeholder engagement, because I still think that's one of the key aspects. Is you're also able to build trust, because you can connect with someone at their knowledge and experience level. You're not still having to learn. And I think if you think about a practitioner going in and doing an integration, the last thing that if it's the target company or the acquirer, the last thing what they want to be able to do is to still teach you your job, for you to learn the environment so much so that you still need extra time. So that's why I think you start talking about a reputation for deal speed and successful results. So just tell me a bit about that. I mean, tell me that connection level. And
well, I think what comes to mind for me is being a conductor of an orchestra, because what you've got is you've got a team of people, in the same way that a conductor has got all those musicians there who play their. The conductor does not play every single musical instrument, but they know the piece, they know the journey that they're on, and they know what it should sound like ideally. That doesn't mean they don't take input from the musicians. That doesn't mean that the musicians don't have a huge role to play and bring with them all their specialism. But the conductor is the one who brings it together. And for me, that's what I do with deals. Is I may not be the most knowledgeable person sitting at the table, but what I can offer is an insight to an integrated approach right across the program, so a program director role. Now, there are other practitioners like me who are transformation directors and do a very similar role. The difference between me and a sort of a more established transformation, what I call a transformation director, is that they tend to work on transformations that, major projects that tend to take 1 to 2 years or even longer. I usually have weeks or months to do what I have to do. So you just have to work much quicker, but with the same skills, and therefore the reliance on the team around you is absolutely key. Now, I also don't want to, I remember one client once said to me, why should I listen to you? What do you know about my business? And I said, I don't know your business. You know your business. You're the person who's brilliant at your business. What I know is the process, and I know what we need to do, and I know the journey we need to go on, and I'm going to guide you through that process, and you're going to be the expert in it, not me.
Yeah, I love that, and I think that's part of this environment, because practitioners like yourself who have, and I want you just to give me a bit of your sort of how you run your operation as opposed to other practitioners. So we have certain post-merger integration practitioners that will be, let's say, parts of an integration management office. If you talk about project management, you talk about project management office. Now we just talk about an integration management office. So if you have a corporate environment, and they are often they are serial acquirers, they do this for strategic reasons, they're doing some kind of roll-ups and that sort of thing. And we'll talk about separations as well, because often they buy and then they decide, oh, I didn't want that one, I want to get rid of it, or strategically it doesn't make sense anymore. Just tell us how you operate, as opposed to, let's say, a corporate acquirer, as opposed to a private equity firm, as opposed to maybe just talk around your business model. Like, what do you do? What makes you different to, let's say, all the other alternatives out there?
That makes me sound like I'm really, really unique, Dudley, and I'm not sure that's quite the case. So, I mean, I work for PE houses. They're one of my stakeholder groups, for sure. And I also work for corporate. So I don't necessarily distinguish myself from people who work in those environments and in this space. What I am is an interim who people can jettison in to come and provide specialist skills if they're going through either they haven't got the manpower, that's one, or they don't have the skills and expertise in-house. So if a corporate has got an in-house transformation team that is doing serial acquisitions and integrations and possibly carve-outs, I may not add any particular value to them, because they're a specialist team that are doing exactly the same as me. What they may not have is headroom or bandwidth within their team, and in which case they might bring me in. For the PE houses, they don't tend to retain those people. They bring in people like me to come in, take them through the process, and then I would hand off to an operational team once we've done the deal, or at least once we've set up the integration plan or the separation. Generally, separation we'd see through to the end, but integration can be a very long-term strategy, depending on what you want to do. But what you need to do right at the beginning, and you talk about the 100 days, it's an arbitrary number, but it's a nice number. But that's what we do, is we try and say, well, what is the path of integration? What is all the things that we have to get in that's absolutely critical to the deal at the beginning? And what are the other things that in a longer term strategy an organization wishes to do? And we build out that plan for that. So what do? I am the conductor of all of those different things that are happening within the deal. And I'm jettisoned in either to work with a corporate team or to set up and lead a team for, say, for instance, a PE house. And do you know what? I don't have an expectation of what kind of environment I go into. I think that's one of the things I do. That's a bit different from others. People say to me, would you do? We know it's a bit different. And I go, yes, I'll do.
Yeah, so come back to, I mean, there's a difference between marketing yourself, creating your own personal brand, and then also at the same time helping, let's call it a corporate acquirer, increase or roll out or improve their brand, if you like, through acquisitions, or improve their, I mean, we talk often about synergy capture and value creation and all those nice terms. If I come back to that, so your personal brand is, and I think it comes out there in your profile, and I quite like that: confident, versatile, resourceful. I think that sums it up, because in my mind, that's your brand to a certain extent. It's confident, it's versatile, and it's resourceful. In other words, you are able to be put in any position and take it on and be confident that even if you don't know, that you are resourceful enough to be able to tackle the situation. And I think that's part of those attributes that are critical for being successful in this space. And if it is your purpose to be a practitioner, I think that is absolutely critical. So maybe just a comment on that, because I want to shift gears and go into separations and carve-outs and how they differ from, just for the sake of our audience, how they differ from integrations, and even define what that is. So maybe just let's start with
yeah,
confident, versatile, and
yeah.
resourceful.
So I think the thing that people have asked me a couple of times is, do you just parachute in? And I think that's probably one of the best analogies. That's what I'm offering. I'm offering for somebody to put me into a situation. It doesn't matter what it is. I don't have any expectations of how anything is going to be or what I'm going to find when I get there. I know what I do and how I'm going to bring process, discipline, and some structure to what I might come across, but I'm not got any expectations about what I might go into. And I think that is why I do say I'm versatile and resourceful, because you and I think if I'm really honest, that's the M&A market. You've got to be. I mean, I think the word that now everybody uses is agile, and I kind of stay away from it because it's got too many IT connotations, and B, I think it's slightly overused. But you've got to be able to move and flex and change, and really quickly and comfortably and safely.
Oops. And then if we just go into then let's as I said, we change gears. So let's go and have a look at the differences now. You've got integration on the one end. You've got carve-outs and separations on the other. And I've had one or two people join us on an episode, and some of them are starting to position themselves as separation experts. I mean, it's almost like divorce lawyers to a certain extent. But I mean, tell us your definition of separation, your definition of carve-out, as opposed to doing an integration. Is it the opposite? Is it integration the other side of the coin of of a separation?
So it is and it isn't, and I know that's not very helpful, lots, but I think it is. I think in terms of a sort of process. Are they the same? You start to follow some very similar processes. Let's put it that way. So it starts on can be on quite a similar track, but they go down differently. When you're looking at integration, usually you've got a number of reasons why you're doing an integration. You're doing it because you want to get market share. You're doing it because you can see synergies with your product offering and the acquiring target. You may be acquiring clients, you may be acquiring particular personnel, you may be acquiring patents, technology. There's all kind of different reasons why you might want to do that acquisition. And you're doing it to grow, enhance, and ultimately develop, make your business bigger. Let's be really simple. You want to be bigger and better at what you're doing, generally. And so there are things that you need to do in an integration that have to be done very quickly, around the time of the deal. But integration ultimately can be a slightly longer term strategy. Separation is a bit different. Separation is, so integration and separation for me are the operational processes that you go through. A merger or a carve-out is the deal that you're doing. So that's where I create the distinction. So in a carve-out, there has been a business strategy to carve out literally a part of the business and either put it up for sale, or generally they're putting it up for sale. It's being sold off somewhere else. Either to a competitor, management buyout, various different options. And what they need to do is make that look as attractive as possible to the buyer. And in some cases, you're trying to make sure that what you carve out, you might be helping somebody by doing this carve out. So in a management buyout process, you're actually trying to make sure that that business stands up on its own and is a resounding success. You may keep some investment in it. You may have longer term strategy, i.e. you've got continued relationships with that carved out business. There may be reasons why, as the seller, you really want to see that business succeed. And ultimately, you want to see it succeed on day one, because that's what the whole deal and all the numbers are based on. So it can be different, because what you're doing there is trying to make sure that you are separating the businesses without any damage to the parent, but ideally no damage to the carved out business. You're creating two very good standalone successful businesses in their own right. What you don't want to do, which is what I think some people think is carve out and separation, is carve out a business and just throw it into the bin. You wouldn't go through a carve out and a separation to then put that thing in the bin. That's not what you're doing. You're doing it because you're trying to create a strategic asset that has something of value beyond its life with you. And you probably, as a parent, want to see that happen. And so there are things that you would do that you might not do if you were letting the business go, in terms of you were running it down. You actually want to see it succeed. So you do things to make sure that it has a recipe for success. You don't want to.
And I find it quite challenging, because a separation often means it used to be attached to another entity. So a carve out is partially separation, partially integration, because in the ones that I've seen, is although the seller that wants to carve out a portion of the business and move it on, maybe it's not core for them anymore, whatever the reason, often what happens is they need to try to separate that entity, and it could be even part of their IT systems, their HR and payroll, and just the basic infrastructure relies heavily on let's call it a head office or a shared service component. And now you're carving it out, so you're separating, but at the same time you have a new entity that wants to take it on. So for me, it does seem that it can be quite difficult, because sometimes you have people that are not only now being sort of disappointed that they're no longer part of that group, they now being sort of said, sorry for you, but you going there. And then someone else saying, hey, now we own you. Now we're going to tell you differently to what you did in the past. That must be quite difficult, as opposed to a wholesale M&A where there's an entity that's being acquired, and there's just a nice easy, I don't know if it's easy, more simple integration that happens, where there's no external impact, if you like. I mean, just tell me your experience around that, let's call it dynamic.
So I think for me, it's about communication, and it's really important. I think it's regardless of whether it's integration or separation, communication is absolutely key. And it's about the senior stakeholders being very honest and open. I mean, I'm not saying they have to divulge everything, but they need to be very clear, not necessarily honest. They need to be very clear about the strategy that they're following. So in a carve out, you would want to explain why it is in the best interests for this business to either go somewhere else or to go off and fly on its own, because that's ultimately what the two options. They're either going off to fly on their own and create their own wings and go and fly high, or they're going somewhere else where ultimately, again, they will fly better and fly higher inside another organization. And let's be clear, I wouldn't necessarily sit on a separation and an integration on the other side at the same time. It's physically almost impossible, because the things that I would need to do as part of this separation and the carve out require me to be very focused about my client's agenda, which would be the selling entity. And then there needs to be somebody else who's sitting on the other side of the deal, who's very interested for the acquiring business. And I don't think, in the interest of conflicts of interest, that it would help that you have somebody who straddles both sides of that deal. You may do if it was very small and both parties are very but generally the ones that I've done are bigger. And so you've got one person sitting on one side, and I would only sit on one side. So I either represent the seller or I represent the buyer. And there are different things. And you've got to remember that during a carve out, the thing that's the prize, and the prize is that you've got a commercial, successful, profitable business at the other side of the deal. And that requires the product or the service, the people, and to some extent the operational stuff. But the thing that is most important is what's being sold and the people who are selling it, and the business, the people who run the business. So that's what you've really got to stay focused on.
Yeah, because if you then to add a little more, let's call it spice, what happens is you have an MBO in a carve out, or you're dealing with an acquisition, but it's an internal acquisition, and it I don't know, maybe give us a bit of a flavor, because what's really great about your experience is it's I'm in awe. Okay, so we've got someone who's got such a broad background. You've done not only integrations, you've done separations, you understand carve-outs, and even the dynamic in terms of being buy side, sell side, etc. There's another element of acquisitions that most people don't necessarily think of immediately when you're dealing with integrations and M&A. But if you do an MBO, which is the management buyout environment, now you've got managers who are already part of the business trying to structure a deal to buy out the business. Now, often, because they've been employees, they don't necessarily have the funds or to do an outright purchase. So there'll be some leverage, there'll be other stakeholders, it'll be a whole dynamic around that. I mean, that's quite complex. I mean, you're doing not necessarily an integration in its truest form, but you are trying to help let's call it the sellers exit, and the buyers assume a new position. Is that something you've been involved in, and maybe just expand a bit on that?
Yeah, so yes, I have been involved in a management buyout. So many of the people had been in the business for in some cases 20 years, and we're going off. The rationale, and that's where I said it's really key about clarity around the messaging and the communication, because the rationale for that business and for that buyout was because the business itself, or that part of the business, felt constrained within the parent, and it felt that the management team felt that if they could get out from under the parent, they could fly. I use that analogy. They can fly a lot higher, and they could grow the business, and they've been very successful in what they've done. And so it is a fine line, because they are in the business that you're carving out, and you have to be quite sensitive about the information. So what we had in that situation was we had a number of kind of what are called steercos or boards. So I had one which were with the sellers, and only with the sellers, and none of the management team who were buying out sat on that board, because I needed to have a forum in which I could talk to the sellers openly and honestly without having to worry about any issues that came up being divulged. And then we also had a combined board. And then the management team had their own board as well, similar to ours on the sales side. So you had a sales side, you had a buy side, and then you had a sort of integrated board. And that's how we ran it. And you just had to be very sensitive to what information you could divulge in which one, and where. And the other thing is, in my role, you've got to be really clear about who is your boss, who is your who is your client. My client was the sell side. Now, there were things that would come up for the buy side that were challenges, but ultimately I represented the sell side. So I had to look after my sell side client primarily and foremost, but not to the detriment of the buy side, in the fact that if their business didn't stand up properly, then what were they selling? So, does that make sense? So if we damaged the carve out, to such a point that it lost its value, the sell side would actually lose value on their sale. So you do have to juggle, and that's why the stakeholder management is absolutely key. It's really key, because you are juggling all these different things.
Yeah, and I notice in further down in your profile, you talk about I thrive in ambiguous and complex environments. I think that's a really good example of an ambiguous and complex environment. Although you do, let's say, represent the sell side, you have to almost enable the transaction to complete. Not transaction complete, but to the fulfillment of it, because obviously they've signed or they're in the process. If you do pre-deal sort of work as well. But let's assume they've signed the agreement and there's the MBO now, and it's now, oh, what now? We need to try and make this thing work. You sell side, you need to protect the interests of the seller, but it's ambiguous in the sense that if you don't enable the buyers, the whole thing falls flat, and there's obviously then it's court cases, and it's who said this and who did that. And
for us, it was about not because we were doing a lot of the separation pre-closing of the deal, so we needed to make sure that the deal actually closed on the price that the seller actually really wanted. And so part of that negotiation was always going to be that we had carved out the business in a way that it still retained the value that had been placed on it at the beginning of the deal. So the buyer had to believe that the value was still there and we had retained value. And we did have one very, I did have one very tense moment where in part of the original negotiations, they had talked about the IT systems and they were going to create an absolute hard stop on the systems. And then we realized that if we did, I don't want to go into the detail because it's very complex what we had to deal with, but if we did this particular hard stop, it effectively froze the business. And we were saying, we'll give you a freeze on the financials, here you go, and then you take everything and all the data. But these guys needed to run their business, and we needed to help them run their business in the period that they were transitioning out of the parent, because even though the deal was struck on this day in April, then they were transitioning out of the business for the remainder of the year. And so we had to enable them to be able to still run their business during that transition period. So what we couldn't do was do something that fundamentally stopped their business. And so I had to go back to my sell side board and say, we need to rethink this, because it presented for them a number of challenges to do with data and to do with costs. There were a number of very complex things. And it was a very difficult moment, because it did look like at one point that the deal might not happen because we weren't able to do the deal as it had originally been constructed. We had to construct a new version of that part of the deal.
Yeah, and that's where the art and the science start coming together, isn't it?
Well, I say that's where the art takes over science, because the science was done and the science didn't work. So now it's about the art of the science. So it's about, creating the best looking version of it.
Because I think many times, and this is just a very broad brush statement, but in terms of carve-outs and even any sell side work that you do, often it's this is my number, this is the number I need to get out of the deal, and this is what I need to walk away with. That's let's call it the starting point.
Yeah.
And then as the deal progresses, it starts becoming more complex, more gray. And there's, like you said, that's where the art takes over on the science side.
So I think that's one of the fundamental differences between separation and integration is that integration, generally, you don't have any visibility of the number of what you're walking into until the deal is done. So you do a lot of planning, but it's based on information that has been given to you by the seller, and only that information. You haven't got anything else. I mean, you've got public information, and you've been given the information that the seller has agreed to disclose as part of their disclosure, but you don't have anything else. In a separation, you've got all the data. It's right there in front of you. So the deal is moving all the way through that period, because everybody has got more and more information. The more you dig, the more you start to carve, the more data you find out. And that affects the deal. And so for me, in my role, and in that particular case that I cited, I had to protect the seller's price. And to do that, I had to change some of the features of the deal.
That's that's amazing. So, I mean, that orchestra analogy you used, the conductor analogy, I think, again shows itself. I want to switch gears a little as we come closer to the end of the conversation. I mean, I probably could spend.
I can't believe you said to me it would take. We would talk for a while, and I was like, no, we'll be done in about 20 minutes. But yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I got this probably several points we haven't even touched yet. So Vicky, you're going to need to come back at some stage. But I want to shift gears slightly, and just as we come to the end, and there's something that struck me in your profile. Besides, I mean, the entire profile, but there's something that struck me is a reputation of being great fun to work with, bringing energy and humor in the face of adversity and challenges. And tell me a bit about that, because I haven't seen that yet in many profiles. The bringing of some great fun and energy and humor and that into this. How do you bring that into what essentially is really a serious conversation, or multiple serious conversations? Tell me your mode of operation there with that.
Well, so first of all, I think I put that in my profile because I wanted people to understand who I was, and that as a specialist, they were getting a person, not just my skills. I wasn't just a commodity of skills. They were also getting a person. I think that's and for them to understand who I was. It also comes to, I had a great boss once who said, sometimes, Vicky, the phrase she used was flash the kimono. And I needed to show people a little bit of who I am. So, and it's something actually I don't do very easily. I don't think, maybe it's not come across here, but normally I don't think I do it very well. And so I wanted to do it very honestly and openly, transparently on my profile. I think the thing is about deals is that, add a bit of humor, I don't know. Nobody dies, right? We're not surgeons. We're not heart surgeons. Nobody's going to die at the end of these deals, or live. Well, but a business is going to die or live, okay? But it's not a human. And so sometimes I think we just need to ground ourselves into what we're really doing. And I think humor and fun is a great way just to make people breathe, because I think the other thing is that during deals, and because of the speed of it, people are going so fast, they just don't breathe. They're just they're just fired up and fired up and fired up. And I just think sometimes you need to breathe. And I think what humor does is it kind of sort of cracks that tension and just it's almost like a volcano, I forgot what it's called, an escape hole, where you can just release some air. And I think for me, that's what humor does. It just allows people to just breathe for a minute and have a little bit of, smile on their face instead of, oh my God, this is all so stressful. Because it is stressful. It's a very stressful environment. I think people need to be able to breathe, and they're making, in some cases, some really key and important decisions for other people, for thousands of employees. And it's scary. And I think they just need sometimes a little room to breathe. And I hope that that's what I do. I give them that room.
Yeah, but also doing it with an element of elegance as well, and it's not just I bet it's not cheesy humor. It's actually proper, proper well thought through. I mean, it is pressure release, and it is important. It is important to bring the human side of things, because not everybody, and I'm going to use a little bit of a sports analogy, but it may or may not resonate, but for me, many teams that do very, very well are match fit. In other words, when they go into a game, especially a very big game, they are match fit. They're ready for the game. They've played multiple games before. They've done all the training. They've done all the work, but they are continuously in matches, so they are match fit. Yeah. So when you're a professional integrator, when you're a practitioner, you tend to be match fit for stressful, difficult situations. when you are dealing in an environment where potentially the target, this is the first time they've been acquired, an MBO, it's the first time they've actually done something like this.
Yeah.
A seller, a buyer, even a corporate that's now decided we're now going to open up an integration management office and we just need to set it up. It's like quick and easy,
Yeah.
But I think when you match fit, sometimes you could potentially be fitter, hypothetically speaking, for this environment than whoever you're playing with, who your teammates are, if you like. Would that be a reasonable analogy?
Yeah. So yes, I think in terms of yes. So but I think I don't know if what you're leading to is that people can come that you can be across the table with very different skill sets. So you can be in front of somebody who really knows their stuff versus somebody who is really quite novice and new to it all. And so yes, you do get that.
You would need to adapt. Yeah, you would need to adapt because sometimes, let's say I'm match fit and I'm ready, and the stakeholders I'm bringing with me on this journey are at different levels.
Yeah,
and you have to be able to adjust your volume, if you like, to different levels. And I think that's part of the skill, isn't it?
Yeah, the part of it is adjusting within your own setup, so within your own team. So if you're on sell side or buy side, depending on which side you're on, you've got your own team who might not all be in the same level, but you might also be facing off to a team who's not very experienced. And I've had examples where I've been facing off to a team who are not very experienced, and in some cases you have to kind of almost help them a little bit because they're so unfamiliar with what you're doing. But you need them to do their side of it, so you have to coach them along as well. But also making sure that you are match fit gives you a much better leverage in the whole deal. So making sure that you've got the best match fit team yourself. I just wanted to come back to the humour a little bit because I don't know, you were talking about sports analogies, and I know we've probably only got a minute, but I don't know if you happened to watch the Wimbledon tennis finals yesterday. This is being recorded in June 2022, July, I say. And Kyrgios got very mad in the match, and he couldn't at one point just let go. His team was saying to him, just relax, and you could see him, he was just getting tighter and tighter and tighter, and as a result his performance was failing. And that's where I say the humour is really key. You just need to allow people to decompress a little.
And that's for me where what we call BMT, or big match temperament, comes in, and the ability to play the big game. And I'm going to use that as sort of my next switch into more personal, Vicky. We've got sort of 2 minutes left. Is big match temperament, I think, is and if you go back to sports, but if you look at a practitioner and someone like yourself, you've got the ability to play in the big games. You've got that ability to have a broad let's say skill set that can come in, but not just that. There's that personal element there. There are so many nuances, so many skills that you don't even know. So it's that thing about driving your car. I mean, when we used to drive and not do Zoom meetings, but where you're driving your car and you go from this place to that place and you don't recall how did you actually get there? You got in your car, you don't remember how many times you've adjusted the gears, the indicator, you've turned, you don't even potentially remember your route. You got in and you arrived. So it's that sort of automation, if you like, that starts to happen in any environment. You just know naturally or instinctively what you got to do next. Would you agree with that? I mean, as you become more experienced, yes, the environments change, but having with your broad background, I would imagine it starts becoming easier.
Yeah. So yes and no is my answer to that. Yes, in the terms of getting in a car and driving it, I think it's a good analogy, because yes, you do get in it and you just start to go on autopilot. I think the thing about merger and carve-outs is that you're never getting in the same vehicle. So you're changing vehicles all the time. One time you could be driving a truck, and the next time you could be driving a small little compact. And you've got to be versatile enough to be able to drive across all the different contexts and environments that you'll find yourself in.
Oh, I love it. I love it. That's a great way to end the more serious stuff. Let's just talk a little personal, if you don't mind. So, how do you keep yourself sane in this crazy world? How do you cope with I would imagine long working hours and all the stresses and strains of this environment? Tell us your secret. What's your balancing activity or hobby, or I don't know, whatever you want to call it?
I think those who know me very, very well, my closest friends, would say maybe I don't get the balance brilliantly. I think I've been very driven for a long time, and I love what I do. So ultimately, that's what drives me to do longer hours and stuff. And I like successful results. That's what really drives me is success. But to balance it out, I have a dog walking, listening to music, reading. And also the other thing is I try and stay away from too much news, because I just don't think it's necessarily the greatest. But I do like to read around a lot of different subjects. And quite a few of my friends who don't have nothing to do with my work life say to me, "Oh my God, you know so much about so many things." And I think it's because I like to just read around lots of things. And I think that just helps me just, delve into, I can get away from stuff. I'm not just focused. I don't just read strategy books. I know some people, they're brilliant. They got a brilliant mindset, but they show me volumes of strategy books they read. I like to read a bit of everything because it helps me diversify my mind.
I love it. Okay, that's a brilliant way to end up the episode. Vicky, fantastic.
Thank you.
Please come on again. I mean, I can just think of at least another 6 or 7 things I wanted to have a chat to you about.
Okay.
We've run out of time, but please come back again. It was fascinating. As I said, I'm in awe, and you've had an amazing career. I think next time, maybe if you don't mind, share some of the case studies and things that we, because I think from an audience point of view, I mean, just an hour worth of massive value. Thank you very much. I'm going to say goodbye to you, Vicky.
Thank you for inviting me, Dudley. It was really great to talk to you, and yes, it's been a joy. Thank you very much.
So thank you very much, Vicky. I really appreciate your time. I'm going to say goodbye to the audience. Thank you very much for joining us today on the 100 Days and Beyond podcast. It's the special place for those people that use their skills and their drive, their passion, the enthusiasm, and in Vicky's case, even bring some fun into it. I think it's an amazing world where you can express yourself and you can be challenged. And I love that analogy of every time there's a new integration, you're getting into a new vehicle, and it's not necessarily on autopilot. You need to have your wits about you. Thank you very much for that, Vicky. And audience, please, if you have any questions, if you want to be a guest on the show, please let us know. I would like to just pop my email address for you. Please email me if you have any questions. If you'd like to hear of something specific within the merger, post-merger integration or post-acquisition integration field, if you'd like to be a special guest, or if you want to come in and add a different view on this special world, maybe you're on the receiving end of an acquisition. Thanks again, Vicky, and all the best to our audience. We'll see you on the next episode. Goodbye.